So the first thing is like focus statement, right? So that's going to guide your interviews. It's thinking, who do we need to interview? First question. And it's usually the stakeholders in it. It's the people that there's a few different categories of people that you can get to interview for your stories. And I like to think of them as you can get people that are authoritative on the issue, that have some sort of authority in that area. People that are good at explaining things is the second category. Explaining. So they're good at just summing up what happened, what they're doing. And then third is people with an experience. So people with the experience. So like an authoritative person might be, who decided to put the new carpet in there? So who do we talk to there? Facilities. Yeah, facilities or an administrator, right? So that's the authority on it. Who's going to be good at explaining the process of putting in the carpet? The carpet layer, right? So authority, explainers, and then experience. Who would we talk to about experiencing the new carpet? People walking on the new carpet, right? Kind of a simple example, but that you can break most stories down into that. So who are we going to interview? It's people that have authority, people that can explain it to me, or people that have experienced it. Authority, explanation, experience. That's the basis of, and a lot of times when students are doing stories about something, who do they interview? Who's the only person they're going to interview if they're going to interview someone? Their friend? The principal, the authority. They go, oh, we're doing a story on this. Let's go talk to the principal. I bet what they have to say is going to be interesting. It might be, but it's probably also going to be safe and within the confines of a PR statement. And it should be. That's their job. But who else are we going to talk to if we're going to be the journalists out there finding out the truth, finding out what's really going on? Yes, the authorities are good people to talk to. We can get the soundbite from the spokesperson in the PR department, from the police department. But who else are we going to talk to? The people that were there, right? The people on the ground. That's something I always try to drive, and this is more of a corporate advertising thing. But if we're doing a video for like a nonprofit or something, and it's documentary style, they're like, oh, you've got to interview the CEO at our office in New York. It's like, oh, okay, great. We go to this beautiful office. The CEO's in there. Like, she's done up, hair, makeup, looks great. And she gives a press statement. And it's like, okay, cool. But your organization is about fixing cleft palates on kids in India. So maybe we should go to India and interview the parents of the kid, you know? And so like that's a great example of, and they're like, oh yeah, right. Because they're going to have more heartfelt, meaningful, it impacts them. Do you want to do PR or do you want to do journalism? That's kind of the question. They're both valid fields. And it's like, what do you want your program to be? Some of your program is going to have to be a PR department for the school. It's going to have to do that. But some of you can get away with doing some actual real journalism. What if you have a bite what if the principal says one thing and you have a student that says, no, that's not the way it happened? What if you have that? Can you go there? Maybe. I don't know what your school's like. I don't know what the culture is. What's that? Yeah, maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe though, you know. I know that Dave he's done stories where, like, someone was shooting the football game and they got someone that was, one of the coaches was taking a knee and praying with all the kids, leading the team in prayer, which is, you know, you're not supposed to do that in a public school. And so the kids brought it back and like, what do we, can we do a story on this? And so he'll tell that story later. But are you doing journalism or are you doing PR? It's okay, whatever you're doing. But how do you balance that? I don't know. You got to decide what your program is. Dave made a choice really early on that this is journalism, that he does run it by. He'll give the heads up to the administration, the principal, the people that care about the image of the school. But he cares about you know, telling stories and the truth and what's, you know, and it's not like gotcha journalism or whatever. But yeah, think about that. It's what are you doing? Are you doing journalism or are you doing PR? And it's okay, whichever. And sometimes you do have to do both. And I don't have an answer for that. Also, I'm not a teacher. You know what I mean? Like, I don't live in your reality, and all of you don't live in each other's reality. So you'll have different answers for that. So 2 kinds of interviews. One is the run and gun style. This is going to be where you are usually not a tripod, and usually there's a photographer and there's a reporter, and they're just walking up to people. All right, let's get some quick bites about something that happened in the cafeteria today. Let's get some quick bites on it. And we're talking, these interviews are 30, 45 seconds. And reporter coming up, hey, can you tell me what happened in the cafeteria today? And then we're rolling, you know. So we've got in camera over here. This is what the camera's seeing. And this is kind of what that setup looks like. It's fast, run and gun, real quick. Stick mic. Remember, handheld mic. Our reporter's holding the mic. So this is a run and gun interview. Real quick. One thing that you're going to want to look for in your run and gun interviews, and this is true with the sit-down formal interviews, audio levels. A lot of cameras have these little bars here that will kind of bounce, you know, and if it gets into the red, it means it's going to be like way too hot. And if this is bouncing around really low, and the only way we're going to know that is if we're wearing our headphones, right? So that's one thing to pay attention to when you're doing that. The first question of any interview is, can you please say your name and spell it? That, again, what Dave was saying, it kind of, you know, does give you a little bit of consent to say, well, you know you're being interviewed. And then also, if you're writing lower thirds or going to write some voiceovers, you know exactly how to say the person's name and exactly how to spell it because you have them saying and spelling it. So that's all, and then you get it on camera. So that's always the first question, and record that part. It also gives your photographer a chance to check the sound levels, make sure you're good to go. Again, there's, you know, we have our title there for our lower thirds for this because we had her saying and spelling her name. Okay, this was another example of, so here's kind of like when our audio levels look real low is when they're kind of bouncing around like that. Here's what they might look like if they're slamming into the red. It's going to be distorted and overmodulated. With interviews, we already talked about this, but we're going to go a little more in detail about this. Eyes on third. Remember the 1/3 line from the top. And this is an example of it doesn't really matter how wide or how tight you are, eyes on third. As a general rule, all of these can be broken again, and they are commonly, but standard news style journalism shooting, eyes on third. And again, don't be afraid to cut off the top of the head. That's all right. Eyes on third. So what's wrong with this shot? It's a little too profile, right? So my rule of thumb for this is I like to see both eyes. I like to see both eyes in my interview. And generally speaking, I like to see as much of their face as possible. So how would we achieve that? Straight on, sure. Straight on might look awkward though. Straight on might make your viewers feel uncomfortable. The trick to this is to get your photographer, or sorry, your reporter, to stand as close to the camera as possible. That will create, and even closer than this is still a little too profile for my taste. This still looks good, but I like to get the photographer really close to the camera so that it looks like they're not looking into the lens, but just off. And I think it's a little bit more personal. I think it looks a little bit better. But that's too profile. Be aware of the angle that you're shooting at. If you're shooting at a high angle, looking down on your subject, your background's going to change, right? You're going to see the floor. This is shooting in the exact same spot. And then this is a low angle shooting up at the ceiling. So just be aware that the angle you hold your camera is going to change your background completely. Also, a high angle tends to like make someone look inferior. Psychologically, it kind of has that effect on your viewer, like you're looking down on someone. And a low angle kind of makes them larger than life and tall and like a propaganda movie or something. So be aware that the angle you use actually has an impact on how your viewers see this. So typically, journalistically, I like to shoot everything at eye level, just like dead on, because we're going for objectivity here. We want things to be as objective as possible. So as eye level as possible is great. We talked about in composition, our talking space in front of our subject right here, right? And here's what happens whenever we don't use talking space correctly. We have all of this. And the way to fix this is just to pan over to the left, you know. We want all our talking space here in front of our subject. There's a movie, did anyone see The King's Speech? few years ago. Watch that again. That's a really cool movie because if there's moments where he can't say the words, like if he's stuttering and he's getting caught up and he's getting really frustrated and like feels trapped, they shoot it all like this, actually. They put all the like talking space behind him in those shots. Rewatch that movie. And that's why it makes you feel like, why is this? Yeah. Anything jump out to you in this shot? Where do your eyes go here? Yeah, I will follow my dreams. So if your story's not about following your dreams, I don't like anything legible word-wise in my background of my interviews. Because if your subject gets bored for a second, they're going to just start, or your viewers get bored for a second, they're going to be just looking around your frame reading stuff like, I wonder what that says. So don't draw attention to things that you don't want your viewers to pay attention to. And so just be aware of signs in the background. Signs in the background. What about this one? There is this sign in the background. There's also this pole coming out of her head, you know? These kind of things are sometimes they're unavoidable. Sometimes you don't notice them until you get in the edit bay and you're like, oh boy, there's a pole coming out of her head. But just be on the lookout for that kind of stuff. Backlighting, yeah, we're in front of some windows here. So generally we want to move the subject to the other side so the light is hitting our subject, not backlighting them and making them a silhouette. On the flip side of this, if you want to hide someone's identity, that's how you do it. You set your camera for the background, for the exposure of the background. You're going to have to use manual exposure here. But you set it for the background and then have the person stand in front of it, and you can get a silhouetted profile if you want to hide their identity. Okay, so here's formal interview. Here's how a formal interview might be set up. This is the kind of thing that it's like, all right, we've got an interview with this person, and they've got like a long story they want to tell. They might go on for 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes, whatever. And so we're going to really plan this thing out ahead of time. So what I like to do for those is have as much of the tech set up as possible before the interview starts. Don't have them, and so like this is where you want your crew to show up before the talent. This is true in journalism, it's true in filmmaking, is the crew is going to show up before the talent because the crew needs to set up the tripod, set up the chairs, run a wireless mic over here to the second chair, set up a light if you're going to use a light, and so that the person can just come, it can be as user-friendly as possible. And it can make people nervous, too, if you're setting up all this. They just see a chair, they sit down, and then they start seeing all this stuff getting set up, and they can get kind of nervous about it. So it keeps them at ease. If you're going to use one light in an interview, and a lot of times you just need one light, we call it a reporter sandwich. So when you're thinking about this, where do I put the light? Which side do I put it on? What we like to do is say the reporter's in the middle. So camera, reporter, light. If you're shooting the other direction, it would still be camera, reporter, light. The reporter would still be in the middle. But if you get confused, reporter sandwich. So figure out where the reporter's going, frame up your shot, and then put the light on the other side of the reporter. That's kind of how we like to do it. So before the talent gets there, setting up the camera, again, plugging in that microphone. That's where that mic input on our camera comes in handy. We check the microphone before the talent gets there. Don't make your subjects part of your crew if you can help it. You don't want them to, hey, can you check that mic? Can you give me a check 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3? You don't want to do that with your talent. Have your reporter or your photographer check that beforehand. And then the way that you pin one of these mics on is, the way I like to do it anyways, is they usually just look like this. And I like to loop like that, run it through the pin. And then I usually put it about a foot from their mouth. It's about right, about a foot. But yeah, we usually don't have the reporter in the shot if you're just getting sound bites for the story. You could though, if you had another photographer and another camera, and you wanted to show like another interview or another angle, you'd probably want to set up another light over here to light this guy, or move this light to the middle so it'd kind of hit both of them. But yeah, you could set it up to where if you're having a conversation, you would just need another tripod camera and camera operator and microphone, And you'd have to remember the axis rule, draw a line, stay on this side of them, put the cameras on this side. But yeah, you could do a 2-camera. But for the most part, for what we're going to be doing this week, the interviews you're going to be shooting this afternoon, we're just doing 1 camera. So that's how you do a 1-camera thing. And you don't have to have a light either. I mean, this is just if it's necessary. Lights always make things look better when you use them correctly. But that's a good question. Again, about a foot within, I like to hide the mic cable too. Just take 5 seconds and have them run the mic through their shirt, If you can't go through their shirt, or if they're wearing a dress or something, I go over the shoulder and then around the collar there. Never just have them hold the lapel mic. You're better than that. That's not the way to do it. It's so cheap, and it draws so much attention to it. So get on to your kids for that. That's just so lazy. Sit there, hold a lapel microphone. You gotta be kidding me. Our reporter always has, our photographer is always wearing headphones, so they know exactly what's coming through. And this is a little trick we use, and I'll show you this in a second, but we usually have the camera operator. I always have some sort of cue that I do to the reporter or whoever else I'm working with that they can start the questions. So they need to know, like, okay, cameras are rolling, audio's rolling, everything sounds good, we're good to go. And the way I do that normally is like, you can clear your throat, or another way that I do it is I'll tap twice on their shoulder. If I tap them twice on their shoulder, they know I'm rolling and that everything's good, they can start the interview. What I don't like to do, I don't like to stop and draw attention to the fact that we're beginning now. One of the worst, I keep forgetting this being recorded. We had a client one time that we'd get everything all set up, and then the client would go, they'd be the ones asking the questions, and they go, and go. And so it's just like, okay, and then our subject's just like, oh gosh, okay, sit up straight, and then they start trying to memorize what they're gonna say. So I like a fluid transition, conversational thing. If you formalize this process for people, they're gonna look stiff on camera. If you come in relaxed and low key, they're gonna be more comfortable and relaxed. Another tip for interviews I always tell people is, like, if you're gonna do a bunch of interviews in your school or something, or for a video that you're making, the worst thing you can do is as like a marketing person is to come in and go, we're making a whole new video, it's gonna be awesome, it's gonna be a big, huge deal, you're gonna be in it, it's gonna be this great big thing, we're gonna bring in the crew, the cameras, we got all this new lighting equipment, it's gonna be awesome. Like they're gonna freak out, and they're gonna sit up too straight, and they're gonna rehearse what they say too much. If you ever gotta talk to someone about being in a video or an interview, it's just, yeah, we're gonna pop by real quick, grab an interview, it'll take 10 minutes. Downplay it. Don't make it seem fancy. If you make it seem fancy and formal, people are gonna look stiff on camera, and they're gonna look freaked out. Also, if you're all stressed out while you're setting up all your stuff, and you will be in the beginning, that's okay. But if you're all like stressed out and nervous and stuff, and bring that nervous energy, it's gonna come through in the person being interviewed. Like, it just happens. So the more low-key, calm, take it easy, that's going to come through, and you're going to get better interviews out of it. This is a demonstration interview, and this is what we'd use a wireless mic for. That's what I'm wearing right now, a wireless microphone. I'm free to walk around. This camera can record what I'm saying. And so, like, this guy's doing something in the wood shop or something, so he's got to, like, walk around and kind of be free, can't be tethered. And what I like about doing these kind of interviews is people, when they're doing something, they're less aware of the camera. They're less aware they're being recorded. So sometimes if, like, I don't know, if you're doing an interview if someone was manning the snack table over here, and then you just say, hey, just do your thing. I'm just going to ask you some questions. And you might ask them some questions, and they're like, yeah, the first thing I do is I put out the forks and the napkins. Plates go next. I like this. I like to arrange these in a certain kind of way. And then the muffin basket is always at an angle. That's an interview. That's fine. Also, I needed to grab a napkin to wipe my nose. smooth transition. So like you can interview someone while they're doing something, and a wireless mic is usually pretty handy to be able to do that. You don't have to have a wireless microphone for that, but it does come in handy. When you're out in the field, you don't always have a light with you. And so this is a trick that I like to use. It's the same location, just on one side or the other side of this person. And I just hold my hand up and I kind of try to figure out where is the light. This room is very evenly lit, actually. The only thing that would give you a shadow is if you looked under your hand. But this is very evenly lit. However, if I'm over here by the door and I'm going to shoot an interview, I'm going to get this daylight coming in through here. Like this is going to be, you know, more lit than this side, but it's tough. Like, so if you can't figure out where the light's coming from, hold your hand up and you can see where the light's coming from. And that's a trick that I use if we don't have lights. It's just put the person's face where the light is. Use your hand as a judge. So that's a pretty, because sometimes you can get all your interview set up and be like, all right, we're good to go. And then you're like, oh wait, the light's terrible. Okay, everybody switch, which is fine, but it's good to figure out where they're supposed to be first. So as a part is like if you're doing run and gun stuff, I usually like to figure out light first, and then I'll go, all right, if you could just stand right here, and then have the person stand, you know. I also tell people generally, just keep your feet planted. That'll keep them from pulling one of these on you, or one of these while you're shooting. Just pick a spot on the floor and just say, yeah, if you just keep your feet planted there, and then you can frame up your shot based on that. So I usually get the person in place first. This is an on-camera mic. This is just a little LED or light. This is a little LED light that's camera mounted. There's no light with a light. It looks better. The thing with on-camera lights, though, is they also kind of look like they're on cops, always. So it's better, but they also look like they're on cops. So the way to avoid looking like you're on cops, and if we went handheld with this shot, it really looked like they were on cops. So camera-mounted lights are fine. It's fine if you have to use those. But the thing that makes lighting look a little better, a little more expensive, is if you can just get that light off camera a little bit. Just 30 degrees away from, a couple feet away from the camera, it's going to look better because it's going to give definition to the face. This is just a flat, like, bam, spotlight of light. And it's lit, you can see it, but it's better than nothing. But if you have time to put that light on a stand right off a camera, that's always better. But you don't always have time to do that. Also, sometimes you just have people hold the light. Just stand real still and hold the light. If you're moving it around, it's going to look like, I don't know, like a police siren. Yeah, it's going to look like an effect, but yeah. So some tips for shooting interviews. If someone's rocking around, all you got to do is be like, hey, do you mind just keeping your feet planted there for me? Thanks, you know. You don't want to make people feel self-conscious, but you don't want to edit an interview of someone doing this. Like it's not going to work in the edit. Take a minute and just say, yeah, if you can just keep your feet planted. Never, ever interview somebody in one of these chairs. That's just like, and there's so many swivel chairs in a school. It's like they're all swivel chairs. Just don't do it, because then in your shot they're gonna be framed up here, and they're just gonna be moving back and forth the whole time because they're nervous and they're trying to fidget around and stuff. So just swap out the chair, get a different chair. Never do it. It's always a huge mistake. If there's two people in your shot, then you're interviewing two people, or like they insist on being interviewed together for whatever reason, or if you just don't have time to take people individually, like what I like to do is I like to frame them up as individuals. I don't like to do a two-person interview, because then like that second person could be looking around, they could be looking at their phone, they're going to be distracting. So while she's talking, frame her up like an interview, and then likewise do the same with her when she starts talking. Does that make sense? So if you're going to, let's say you're in a situation where your microphone is not working, and you know this because you were wearing headphones, and you're like, our mic's down, what are we going to do? We have to shoot an interview without a microphone. This isn't an excuse to do it this way. You should still like avoid this at all costs. But sometimes the mic isn't working and you've got to figure something out. So the way to do this is get close to the subject and zoom all the way out. So you're not going to get good sound being this far away. It's just not going to sound good at all. So you've got to get close and zoom out. And you're close to them. They're going to feel uncomfortable. This isn't the best way to do it. But in a pinch, this is the way to save your sound. Get close, zoom all the way out. Zooming all the way out also makes sure they're not like super tight shot on them. And then it also keeps your camera a little more steady. If you're zoomed in, handheld, it can get shaky. So you want to zoom out and get close. If for some reason you have to do this. Worst case scenario, though. Same with your phone. If you've got to just do an interview and all you have is your phone, you're going to have to get close, and you're going to have to, you got to get that mic close to their face. And you might have to ask them to speak up, too. So not ideal, but that's how you do it in a pinch. All right, what's wrong with this interview shot? Direct sunlight, right? This is painful. The shadows are terrible. It's uncomfortable to be in the sun like that. But like, what are you going to do? Swap them around? Then they're going to be backlit. So the way to fix this is actually to move to the shade. You're going to want to move to the shade like this. And you might say, well, that's way darker. It's like, yeah, but this is where you're going to have to like learn the manual settings of the exposure on your camera. Also, you're going to have to do a manual white balance because the color temperature is different in the shade than in the sun. But here's what, you can kind of see before and after there the difference, how much better it looks in the shade. And you might be like, well, why is this just as bright? Well, we set our camera settings to it. You can make the shade look just as bright as the sun. You just have to open up the iris or the ISO, and I can show you how to do that on your individual cameras. And you're also like, well, why is the color exactly the same? It's like, well, because we white balance. You can get that exact same skin tone, the exact same color information by just white balancing. So move into the shade, and that's a lot easier. And then it's this nice diffused light on her. Again, here is backlighting. So don't backlight, folks. That's the same hallway. It's one side and the other. If you, for some reason, are a short person and you're interviewing a tall person, to get that camera eye level, and for students, sometimes you got to grab a chair. Sometimes, like, we have to use Apple boxes, as they're called, on some of our projects. So you got to, get up to their height. And even if you're asking the questions, you might have to throw a couple phone books under your reporter to get at eye level, so their eye line's right. Watch out for people in your backgrounds. It's just, try not to frame stuff up to where there's a chance for people to come by and hoot and holler in the background of your shots. So, a couple tips for reporters. Don't ask yes or no questions. We're trying to get sound bites, right? We're trying to get people talking. And if you do accidentally ask a yes or no question, that does happen sometimes. If you accidentally, because you're having a conversation, that's normal. It's like, are you having a good time in the workshop?
Yes.
Oh, like, why? Tell me more about
The jokes.
So, like, you can ask follow-up questions. If you accidentally ask a yes or no question, ask a follow-up question. Oh, tell me more about that. What do you mean? What do you mean by that? Play dumb. There's another thing that we do in real-life conversations that you shouldn't do in interview conversations, and we pretend to know what people are talking about in real life. Someone will be like, oh, yeah, well, this, and this. And you're like, oh, yeah, I definitely understand what you're talking about. And we just lie to each other. And we're like, oh, yeah, right, cool. If you don't understand something, your viewers aren't going to understand it either. You have to play dumb. You have to go, oh, I'm sorry. Can you explain that to me? I don't know what that is. Or you got to be the advocate for your viewers, too. If they're explaining something or using terminology and you don't know what it is, or your viewers won't know, you have to play dumb. You have to find out for your viewers. So you have to go, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that. Can you explain that to me? And then you're going to get great sound bites of like, oh, yeah, sure. Well, here's the layman's terms for that thing. And so That's a great tip, and that's hard to get over because we have egos and we're like, we don't want to admit we don't understand what other people are talking about sometimes, and so it's great for your ego to kind of bring it down a little bit, to play dumb. If you're not getting it, if you're like, I really need a soundbite about that, you can ask the exact same question and just rephrase it. Just ask it in a different way. That's fine. Just if you're like, I didn't get it there, then you can ask the exact same question in a different way. People aren't even going to notice. People don't even care. People love talking about themselves, and they'll be happy to answer it again. I like to use silence in my interviews. This is hard. This is really hard, and it's really hard for students too, is when you're having a conversation, not to just fill the silence, not to just jump in and have to, because there's nothing worse in a conversation than two people standing in silence and not knowing what to say. So a lot of times you can use that to your advantage as an interviewer. You can let it hang out. It's the pregnant pause. If you sit there in silence and outlast them, they're going to keep talking. And they might say something great. So just give it a second. Like it is awkward. It's going to be uncomfortable. But it's the awkwardness that makes them jump in and fill that silence. So just chill out and just give it a couple seconds afterwards. You don't want to make them feel uncomfortable, but a lot of times people will fill that silence. If you have the courage to let 5 seconds of silence go, hang out in a conversation that you're having. It can be a very useful thing. Don't talk over your subject while they're talking. So this is usually well intended, and okay, I'm going to need you to tell me about your tell me a typical day in your life, work day in your life.
Well, when the students first come in, we greet them at the door.
Okay.
And then, wait, I'm talking.
Yeah, right. Well, we do that in normal life. We do that in normal conversation, right? We do that normally. Is like we give people a little verbal. Oh, yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, great. Like we do that kind of stuff. And so you just have to not do that when you're doing an interview. You just have to go. You've got to be expressive, and you've got to let them know you're actively listening to them and paying attention to them. But you can't do that verbally, or else you're going to ruin your sound bites. You're going to have your voice in there while their sound bites are going. You can't have that. Cool. The people are going to, and this isn't always like smile. We probably should have rephrased this in that DVD. It's more that people tend to mirror what they're seeing. Sometimes I'll be watching a video that we're shooting, and it's someone like smiling on camera. And while I'm editing, I find I'm smiling, and I'm like, this is weird. But like when you're interviewing someone's going to kind of mirror your personality in a way. And so if you are doing like an interview about something that's kind of exciting and fun and upbeat, you kind of want to match that energy a little bit, or at least be aware that the way you present yourself is going to be mirrored in your video, in your interviews. Or if you're going at it dull and dry, we need to get a quick interview. Tell me about what's going on today. Then they're gonna match your level because you're in charge. If you show up with a camera around someone and mic them up, you are in charge of them. There's an entire industry that's built off this called reality television, and it's producers and camera people manipulating individuals because they are in charge of them. And you can manipulate people with this technology and with this media and with this scenario you've put them in. And so you need to be aware that you do have an impact over those people, and to be aware of that and to not manipulate people, but also to know that you will influence the way that they come across on camera. Now, if we're approaching someone to do run and gun interview, this is what I don't like to do. And unless you're like, I don't know, Michael Moore or something, then you probably shouldn't do this. But if we're meeting someone for the first time, Mel, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. You're not gonna like run up to like, hey, can we interview really fast?
Like,
No.
It's like,
right.
Did you see his shoulders? Like the moment I did that, he's just like, oh god, they're gonna hit me with the camera. kind
So I don't like to come in guns a-blazing. I like to come in camera down low. This feels like a weapon when it's up in someone's face. If you're holding it down here, or even if you want to point it away from them, to just subconsciously let them know we're not filming them right now without their permission. And especially in California. I don't know if this is truer here than other places, but I'd like to diffuse the conversation and approach people, and it would look something like this. And I always let the reporter lead the conversation. I'm just the monkey with the camera.
Hey, do you have a quick second to talk to us about this workshop today?
Sure.
Awesome, thanks so much. That's a little bit more casual. Something else you can do is like your reporter can go without the camera person. So sometimes it's nice to have like no equipment come up at all. And then that way they know that they have the option to say like yes or no.
So can you tell me like what do you like to do? What's a hobby for you?
Oh, I like to ride my bike along the American River.
Oh wow.
Just hang out by the river sometimes.
How'd you get into riding your bike?
When I was a child.
Have you ever had like a competition or anything where you've done biking?
No. Very casual. I'm very beach cruisery.
Okay. That sounds awesome. Could you go ahead and say your name and spell it for me?
Sure, my name is Brad Augusta, Bradaugusta.
All right, can you tell me a little bit about what you're doing here today?
I am sitting in a comfy chair learning about how to help myself understand the techniques of interviewing.
Okay.
All right, cool. There we go.
Yeah.
That's run and gun interview. If I'm going to do a sit-down interview of some sort, I like to have the camera just a little bit behind the photographer. I don't like it when the camera's in the middle. All right, I need another volunteer.
Would you care to just pop a seat?
All right. You're up. Yeah, bad choice. So this feels like the technology's in charge, and then for some reason, this just feels like you're allowed to have a human conversation.
Fly on the wall.
I like to have the camera just a little bit behind the photographer. Also, I also like to have, I'll go ahead and have you like move closer. And then maybe even a little bit closer. Generally, if you're trying to figure out how to get people positioned and stuff, I like to square people's shoulders up to each other. I like to have my, I like to have my reporter and my subject facing each other. I think this does something and whenever you get a little bit closer, bring people closer, it distracts them from the camera a little bit. So I like them, I don't like them too far apart. And you know when it's too far apart. So I like it to be close enough to feel kind of personal. And again, I'm going to set up just behind my reporter, and then I'm going to start framing up my shot while Melina starts having a conversation. Say we're doing a story about the workshop today. What Melina isn't going to do is ask all the questions about the workshop.
What's the workshop today?
Don't talk about the workshop until you're recording. So you talk about anything else in life before you talk about the focus statement of your subject. My number one thing is light. I'm going to put the person where the light's the best. Wherever the light looks best, that's going to be my number one in my hierarchy of what I'm going to try to do. Secondly, I'm going to do eyes on third and then framing and stuff. And then fourth, get the best background I can. We're limited to kind of where we could be here. But here's generally what I like. I will tell you this. A couple things on manual focus. If you notice, this was on automatic focus for a few minutes before I figured out where that was. So I zoom in, I focus on her. And then what happens inevitably, our camera goes, no, I want to focus on this. So this is on automatic focus. If you move around a little bit, it might catch you. No. It doesn't matter. And it has a little override thing, so I can focus on you. Okay, good to go. This is automatic focus, okay? So like I said, it's okay to shoot automatic focus whenever you first start shooting. But if you want any sort of control over your image or your shot, or like to foolproof it, switch this to manual, bam, and then now I have control over what my viewer is focused on. Does that make sense? Yeah. Now it's locked. That's not moving. And here's another kind of thing that I like to do with my interviews. Could you move your chair almost against the wall there? Yeah, there you go. A lot of times people will shoot interviews like this. They'll just go right up against the wall. And that's fine. I mean, there's nothing like technically wrong with this. Or they'll just do like the brick wall behind them or like the lockers behind them. But what's going on? What's lacking in this shot? Depth. Yeah, exactly. It's just like flat. It's just blah. There's no, and everything's sharp. Everything's in focus, which makes it just feel like cheap video. So if you can move back to where you were, a trick for creating more expensive looking videos is just to add depth to your shots. And to do that, you need space. You need space between, can you see the screen all right? You need space between your subject and what's behind them. So there's a good 20 feet back here that creating all of this depth in our shot. If you look at the footage, I'm out of focus too, which that also is creating that's tricking your eye into thinking there's depth, because video is two-dimensional. It's up and down, and then it's left and right. That's it. That's all we have to work with. But we can create the illusion of Z space with depth by making things in the foreground focused and the background's not focused. Close one of your eyes, and then put your finger about, a foot from your face, or put your hand over your eye if that's tough for you, and then focus on your finger. Everything in the background's blurry, right? That's how a video camera works. A video camera is just like one eye. So that creates the illusion of depth, because we have two eyes, and so we have 3D vision. So we have parallax, and we can see around things. We can gauge depth. If you close one eye, that's kind of how a video camera sees the world, and you can create the illusion of depth by focusing on something and making the background out of focus. You can also create the illusion of depth. This is more of a film thing. I don't know if you'd really do this in journalism very much. This is just kind of photography tricks. You can create even more depth in this shot by having something in the foreground. Now what we have is layers in this, in this frame, and that's created with space. Another trick, if you really wanted to create even more depth, you could add more depth between you, your subject, and the background, and that'll make our background even blurrier, creating even more of a illusion of depth. So you could shoot like this far away, and then bring zero attention to, even less attention to that. But it's harder to communicate with your reporter and stuff. But technically, if you have the space for it, it's a really pretty way to get, and a cheap way to get that depth in your shots without having to buy a really expensive lens. That's why movies look like this and video looks like that, because we have so much depth to play with, and movies they shoot on these lenses that are really expensive and can create this level of depth of field, and we can fake that with a video camera. You just need a lot of space, or you need a really expensive lens. But the other thing the photographer can do is just not draw attention to themselves. Like they'll forget about you if you aren't constantly like messing with them, and and you have these little subtle ways of communicating and stuff. If I'm a solo photographer, and sometimes I am, sometimes I have to do it this way. But if you notice the way I was doing this when I did have Melina, if you want to pop over there, yep, great. We're going to do a standing one. And if you do have to go handheld, never just hold the camera like this. This is going to be really shaky, especially if you're zoomed in. Then it's going to be hard to keep this stable. This actually has built-in image stabilization, and it looks pretty good. Yeah, well done. Thank you. But that said, and you're going to get tired. I always put two hands on the camera if I'm ever going handheld, and I can keep it fairly stable if you have two hands on it. The other little trick is to add a third point of contact, like your shoulder, and that's going to get even more stable. Or your face. Then it's basically, if you do this enough, you can kind of get to almost look like a tripod. So that's one way. That's a little trick. The more points of contact, I know you feel silly just like pushing against your face, but same with your hip. If you're going to shoot from the hip, you can get a pretty stable shot just by holding it here It's 1, 2, 3 points of contact there on the camera. Keep it pretty stable. And so if I was going to interview Anna, I would actually probably hold the camera like this. I know it feels silly, but this camera, I have a viewfinder here, I would hold it like this. And what I would do is I would approach, hey, I'm Brandon. Do you mind if I interview you about the workshop real quick? It'll just take a second. Okay, cool. Awesome. Can you say your name and spell it for me?
It's Anna Hoxson, ANNAHOCSON.
Okay, cool. And so what I'm doing is you're kind of doing both jobs, and this is tricky and does take some practice, but you want to like ask the person a question and then kind of peek down, like you want eye contact when you're asking the question, and then you peek down to look at your viewfinder to make sure your audio levels look good and that you kind of frame it up. And so, and then I would usually say in this case, like, you can just look at me. I'm usually shoot with someone else, but just don't worry about the camera, and yeah, we'll just look at me. So yeah, how is the workshop going so far today?
Good, pretty good. Learning a lot.
Yeah, what kind of stuff are you figuring out?
Just how to kind of help set up shots and how to edit, and because I was not really using a lot of the Wii videos, more of uploading stuff from my camera and helping Patty that way, just getting more stuff.
Awesome. What would you tell someone who's thinking about maybe coming to this workshop?
If they really want to start media in their class or in their school, I would definitely suggest that they would take this.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, so I think I forgot to ask her to say her name and spell it. That was it. Oh, I did?
Yeah, you did.
Oh. I have no memory of that. So that's kind of how you would do a one-person interview. You kind of keep that eye contact, and then while they're talking, you glance down and in your frame. I've done those a lot. And sometimes if you're a backpack journalist, or you can set it up on a tripod. If you have time, bring a tripod, set it up, and then you're going to have to kind of do the same thing, glancing over stuff. Yeah.
Now, why is it that they're not supposed to look directly into the camera? Is it too fake looking or something? Or?
Yeah, so okay, let's try one where Anna answers this question. So I want you to look right into the camera. Tell me about what are you learning today at the workshop?
Just different ways on how to do an interview and hopefully not do the wrong thing.
Yeah, so keep looking directly into the lens if you don't mind. When your subject looks directly into the lens, it feels like they're talking to the audience.
Right.
And they're not talking to the audience. They're not addressing the audience. The anchors are, if you're doing a news show, the anchors are talking to you. They're talking directly to you. They're reading a teleprompter and they are addressing you. If you're interviewing someone about something, they're not talking to the audience. They are talking about something. And so they're talking to the reporter. They're having a conversation. We're recording someone's conversation. We're not recording someone addressing the viewers. That's the difference. Anchors talk to the people at home. The people in sound bites are talking about something. And so it's less awkward. It's people that aren't trained to talk into cameras feel uncomfortable talking into cameras. It's just the way it goes. So.